Hi guys, tonight we step into something very ordinary and yet strangely mysterious. The quiet moment when you wake up in the middle of the night and everything feels still, almost paused. You are lying in a soft bed, maybe under a heavy blanket, and there is a faint glow of moonlight slipping through a window curtain. The air is cool, and you can hear the smallest sounds. Your own breathing, maybe the faint creak of wood somewhere in the house. It feels modern, familiar but also oddly ancient, like your body remembers something older than clocks and alarms. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and if you feel like it. Leave a comment with where you are watching from and what time it is for you right now. It is always interesting to see how many of us are awake in the same quiet hours across the world. Now, dim the lights. You settle back into this calm space, and we begin to trace a question that has followed humans for thousands of years. Why do so many people wake up in the middle of the night, often at the same hours, between deep sleep and early morning, when the world is at its quietest? Long before modern science, before electricity and glowing screens, sleep was not always thought of as one long block. In fact, in many historical periods, people described the night as having phases. They would sleep, wake, and sleep again, today. We often assume uninterrupted sleep is the natural standard, but history suggests something more layered, something softer and more fragmented. To understand this, you imagine yourself stepping into a much older world, where nights are darker than anything you have experienced. There are no streetlights, no glowing clocks, only firelight and stars. The temperature drops quickly after sunset, and the human body responds in ways that modern life often hides from us. In the early centuries of human history, especially among pre-industrial societies, people often experienced what researchers now call segmented sleep. This is the idea that sleep naturally comes in two parts. The first sleep begins soon after darkness falls. It is deep and heavy, like sinking into the earth. Then, after several hours, people would wake up naturally. They might stay awake for a while, quietly, before returning to a second sleep that lasted until dawn. This was not seen as strange. It was simply night. A mainstream historical fact supports this idea. Written records from medieval Europe, including diaries, legal documents, and even medical texts, describe people waking in the middle of the night and using that time for small tasks. Prayer or quiet conversation. In some households, this was completely expected. Not a disruption, but a rhythm of life. And yet there is a quirky detail that makes this even more fascinating. Some historical sources mention what people called the first sleep and second sleep quite casually, as if everyone already understood the structure. In between these sleeps, people sometimes visited neighbours, tended to small household chores, or simply sat by the fire in silence, listening to the night breathe around them. Scholars remain divided on whether this segmented sleep was truly universal or whether it was more common in certain regions and social classes. Some historians suggest it was a widespread human pattern before modern lighting changed everything. Others argue that the evidence is selective, shaped by the limited records that survived. The debate continues, and it gently reminds us that even something as basic as sleep is shaped by culture, environment, and time. Now, imagine yourself inside one of these older nights. You're in a small wooden home. The walls are thick, but not enough to fully block the cold. You can smell a faint smoke from a dying fire. The bed is shared, maybe with family members close by. They're breathing slow and steady. Outside, there is only darkness, deep and endless, broken occasionally by the sound of wind moving through trees or animals shifting in the distance. You fall into what feels like the first sleep. It is heavy, almost immediate, as if the body has been waiting all day for this release. Hours pass without awareness. Then, gently, without alarm or urgency. You wake. There is no panic, no glowing phone, no sense that something is wrong, just quiet awareness. You might sit up slightly. You might listen to the house. You might even think, in a calm and wandering way, about dreams you just had in some historical accounts. People use this time for reflection, prayer, or small conversations. In others, they simply remained still, enjoying the quiet separation between sleeps. And you might wonder, how did people know when to return to sleep without clocks? The answer is simple and strange at the same time. They listened to their bodies. They trusted darkness and fatigue more than time. Today, we often measure sleep by efficiency, by hours tracked and cycles optimized, but in earlier periods, sleep was part of a broader rhythm of survival, shaped by seasons, labor, and the absence of artificial light. Even firelight played a role in shaping how humans experience the night. A flickering flame creates uneven patterns of light and shadow, which subtly affect alertness. It keeps a small part of the mind awake, even while the body rests. Some anthropologists suggest that this may have contributed to natural mid-sleep awakenings in early human societies, and yet modern research continues to question whether segmented sleep was truly a biological norm or simply a cultural adaptation to darkness. Some scientists argue that humans are biologically wired for one continuous sleep, and that fragmented sleep in history was more about environment than evolution. Others suggest the opposite, that modern uninterrupted sleep is the disruption, not the original pattern, so you remain in this quiet historical space, where the night is not something to be conquered or optimized, but something to move through slowly, in two gentle waves. The fire in the corner of the room has burned lower now. The world outside is still completely dark, and you realize that waking in the middle of the night might not be a failure of sleep at all. It might simply be how humans once lived inside time itself, softly, without urgency, between one darkness and another. You begin to drift away from the idea of modern bedrooms and soft mattresses, and instead you find yourself moving backward through time, further than written records, further than cities, into a world where sleep is not scheduled or protected, but woven directly into survival. In this landscape, you are walking with early humans across a vast stretch of ancient terrain. The air feels different here. It is sharper, more open, filled with the scent of soil, smoke, and wild plants crushed underfoot. Nights are not quiet in the modern sense. They are filled with distant movement, rustling grass, the calls of unknown animals, and the constant awareness that the world is shared with things far more powerful than comfort. Prehistoric life was shaped by necessity. There were no walls to lock out danger, no controlled heat, and no guarantee that the next day would come easily. Sleep, therefore, was never simply about rest, it was about protection, coordination, and awareness. A mainstream historical fact drawn from modern anthropology helps us understand this better. Studies of contemporary hunter-gatherer groups, such as the Hadza in Tanzania, show that sleep patterns in pre-industrial societies are often shorter and more flexible than those in industrialized nations. People tend to sleep in ways that respond directly to environment, temperature, and social activity rather than fixed clock time. While these groups are not prehistoric, researchers use them as a living reference for understanding how early human sleep may have functioned under similar conditions. You settle into this idea slowly. In this ancient world, you're not lying alone in a quiet room. You're part of a small group, perhaps 10 or 15 people, gathered close together for warmth and safety. The ground beneath you is uneven, covered in layers of leaves, animal hides, and whatever soft materials could be gathered during the day. The sky above is immense and uncaring, filled with stars that seem closer than they do today. Fire becomes the center of everything. You sit near it, feeling the heat press against your skin in uneven waves. One side of your body is warm while the other remains exposed to the cool night air. The flames flicker and shift, casting moving shadows across the faces of those around you. These shadows are not just comforting light, they're also a kind of early warning system, helping the group remain aware of movement in the surrounding darkness. In prehistoric nights, sleep likely came in fragments. You might drift into a light rest, then wake as someone shifts position nearby, or as a sound moves through the grass. Then you settle again. This cycle repeats gently, not as a disruption, but as part of survival itself. There is a quirky detail that emerges from archaeological interpretation and experimental reconstructions of ancient life. Some researchers believe early humans may have used layered sleeping arrangements near fires, placing warmer individuals closer to the center, while others slept slightly farther out. Rotating positions through the night, animal hides, ash insulation, and gathered grasses were used not only for comfort but also for temperature regulation, creating a shared sleeping environment that was constantly adjusted. You imagine this shifting arrangement. It feels almost like breathing, the group adjusting itself slowly through the night without words, guided only by instinct and familiarity. The ground holds heat from the fire, but only briefly. As the night deepens, the cold creeps in from all sides. You pull a hide closer, feeling its rough texture against your skin. Nearby, someone coughs softly, then settles again. A child shifts closer to an adult for warmth. Nothing is fixed. Everything is adaptive. Scholars remain divided on how structured prehistoric sleep truly was. Some historians suggest that early humans practiced a form of polyphasic sleep, meaning multiple short sleep periods spread across the night and day, shaped by environmental demands and predator risk. Others argue that evidence is too speculative, and that sleep may have been more continuous but easily interrupted by external stimuli. The lack of direct records leaves this question open, suspended in the same uncertainty as the night sky above you. As you remain in this ancient scene, you begin to notice how different awareness feels here. Sleep is lighter, but not in a fragile way. It is more like floating near the surface of consciousness, always ready to rise if needed. Even dreams might have been different, shaped by survival instincts, memory of landscapes, and constant attention to sound. You might wake fully several times during the night, not because something is wrong, but because vigilance is part of rest. A distant snap of a branch might bring your eyes open. A shift in wind might make the fire crackle differently. Then, when nothing follows, you ease back into sleep again. There is no clock. There is no expectation of uninterrupted rest. Time is measured in firelight, in the movement of stars, and in the gradual cooling of the earth beneath you. And you might wonder how exhausting it must have been to live this way. But the body adapts. Early humans didn't think in terms of sleep quality as we do now. Instead, sleep was integrated into the rhythm of survival, balanced with waking hours that were themselves flexible and responsive to need. Another layer of evidence comes from comparative studies of animal sleep. Many mammals in the wild do not sleep in long, uninterrupted blocks. Instead, they rest in cycles, waking frequently to check surroundings. Some researchers use this as a model for understanding how human sleep may have evolved under similar ecological pressures. Researchers continue to question whether consolidated sleep is a relatively modern adaptation linked to safety and stable shelter rather than an ancient biological default. You lie there now in this imagined prehistoric night, feeling the weight of that possibility. Perhaps the idea of sleeping straight through the night is not the original human pattern at all. Perhaps it is something that emerged later, when fire became more controlled, when shelters became more secure, and when danger moved further from the sleeping body. The fire begins to shrink into glowing embers. The group remains close, bodies forming a loose circle of warmth and protection. Breathing becomes the most consistent sound. The night is not silent, but it is steady in its unpredictability. You drift again, not into deep escape, but into a shallow, watchful rest that feels strangely natural here. And as you do, you start to understand that what we now call broken sleep may once have been the most stable way to exist in a world that never truly stopped moving. You remain in this ancient world, but now the darkness shifts slightly. It is no longer just open night sky and scattered survival. Instead, there is something new taking shape, something that quietly changes the way humans experience sleep itself. Fire. Not just a spark or a brief flame, but a controlled, steady presence that begins to anchor human life in ways that would eventually reshape history. You are sitting with early humans in a small clearing. The air smells of smoke mixed with damp earth and burned wood. Your eyes adjust constantly between light and shadow as the fire flickers in uneven rhythms. Every movement of the flames feels almost alive, like it is breathing with the group. A mainstream historical fact helps ground this moment. Archaeological evidence suggests that early humans, possibly Homo erectus, were using and maintaining fire as far back as roughly 1 million years ago, while the exact timing is still debated. Controlled fire is widely considered one of the most important turning points in human evolution. It provided warmth, protection, and a way to extend activity beyond daylight hours. But here, in this moment, fire is not just progress, it is also something that subtly reshapes sleep. You settle closer to the fire and feel its heat pressing against your skin. The warmth is uneven, stronger on one side of your body, fading quickly as you shift even slightly. This unevenness matters. It creates a sleep environment that is not fully stable, not fully dark, not fully silent. It is a space between wakefulness and rest. Around you, the group arranges itself in a loose circle. Some lie closer to the fire, others farther back. The positioning is not random. It is shaped by comfort, hierarchy, age, and simple need. You notice how people instinctively adjust through the night, inching closer as the fire weakens, then shifting away when it flares again. A quirky detail emerges from experimental archaeology. In some reconstructions of early fire-based sleeping sites, researchers have found evidence that ancient groups may have repeatedly raked ash and embers into insulating layers beneath sleeping areas. These ash beds could retain warmth for longer periods than bare ground, creating a soft thermal cushion that helped regulate body temperature through cold nights. It sounds almost poetic, seeping on the memory of fire itself. The memory of fires. You imagine lying on such a surface. The ground would feel warm in patches, cool in others, constantly changing as the fire shifts above it. Sleep would not be a single descent into darkness, but a negotiation with heat, light, and sound. Now you begin to notice how fire changes awareness. Even when your eyes close, the flickering light filters through your eyelids. It creates a kind of moving pattern in the mind, a soft visual rhythm that keeps part of you lightly awake. The body rests, but the senses never fully shut down. Every pop of burning wood, every shifting shadow, becomes part of a background language the brain is always listening to. Scholars remain divided on how significantly fire altered early human sleep cycles. Some researchers suggest that controlled fire extended waking hours, delaying sleep onset and creating more fragmented rest. Others argue that fire actually improves sleep quality by increasing safety and reducing nighttime stress. The truth likely sits somewhere between these interpretations, shaped by environment, season, and group behavior. You listen to the fire crackle. It sounds random at first, but slowly you begin to recognize patterns in it. A steady burn, a sudden pop, a long hiss as damp wood releases moisture. Each sound pulls you slightly in and out of sleep, like a gentle tide that never fully stops moving. In this world, night is no longer absolute darkness. It is layered with controlled light, and that layering changes everything. Another mainstream historical insight comes from anthropology. The mastery of fire is believed to have contributed not only to cooking and protection, but also to social bonding. Groups that gathered around fire likely spent more time interacting after sunset, sharing stories, grooming, and coordinating daily survival tasks. This extended social time may have gradually influenced how and when people slept, introducing more variability into nighttime rest. You imagine that now, instead of silence and isolation, there is soft murmuring around the fire, occasional laughter, the quiet exchange of information, even during rest. There is a sense that the group remains loosely connected, and yet sleep still comes. It comes in waves, just as it did in earlier scenes. You feel yourself drifting into a light rest, then waking slightly as the fire shifts or as someone moves nearby. There is no alarm to it, no interruption that feels unnatural. It is simply how the night unfolds. You might wonder if early humans ever felt fully safe. Fire certainly reduced danger, but it also attracted attention. The glow could be seen from far away in the darkness. Some historians suggest that this may have created a paradoxical effect, where fire both protected and exposed early human groups. Others disagree, arguing that the benefits far outweighed any risks, especially in regions with large nocturnal predators. The debate continues, and it reflects how uncertain our understanding of early sleep truly is. As the night deepens, the fire begins to shrink, flames grow lower. Transforming into a bed of glowing coals, the light becomes softer, more stable, less chaotic. Shadows slow down, the world feels less animated, more settled. You lie back and feel the ground beneath you. It is not smooth or soft in the modern sense, it is uneven, textured with earth, plant fibres, and possibly animal hides. Yet there is a strange comfort in its simplicity. Your body adjusts to it, rather than expecting it to adjust to you. Arrives again, but not all at once. It comes gradually, like a tide returning to shore. And still, even in rest, you remain aware of the fire. It is never fully forgotten. It is part of your environment, part of your rhythm, part of the reason you're alive here in this moment. Some researchers continue to question whether fire fundamentally changed human sleep architecture or merely amplified existing patterns. Did it create wakefulness, or did it simply make existing cycles more visible and socially shared? There is no single answer, only layers of possibility stacked like embers in the dark. You breathe slowly. The air feels warmer now, thick with smoke that has softened over time. The group around you is quieter. Movement slows. The night enters a deeper phase, though not a final one, because even here, sleep is not a straight line. It is a shifting pattern, shaped by firelight, by memory, by instinct, and by the ancient human need to remain gently aware even while resting. And as you drift once more, you realize that fire did not just light the night, it changed the way humans sleep inside it. You drift forward through time again, and the firelight begins to fade behind you. The air changes, it becomes drier, more ordered, as if the world itself is starting to organize into something closer to what we would recognize as civilization. You find yourself standing near the banks of a vast river in ancient northeast Africa, within the world of ancient Egypt. The air is warm even at night, carrying the faint scent of water, papyrus plants, and fertile soil. The sky above is clear and wide, filled with stars that reflect softly on the slow movement of the river below. This is the Nile River, a constant presence that shaped every rhythm of life here. In this setting, sleep begins to feel different again. Historical records suggest that in ancient Egypt, daily life was closely tied to natural cycles, especially the rising and falling of the Nile and the movement of the sun. People often rose early with daylight and adjusted rest periods according to labour demands, seasonal flooding, and agricultural needs. Sleep was practical, shaped by the necessity rather than strict scheduling. You walk slowly along a small settlement near the river. Mud brick homes line narrow paths. The walls are thick, designed to keep heat out during the day and retain some warmth at night. Inside, families rest on woven mats placed on raised surfaces to avoid the cooler ground. The sounds around you are gentle, distant conversation fading into quiet, occasional movement of animals, and the soft rustle of wind through reeds. One lesser-known detail from archaeological interpretations is that some ancient Egyptian households may have used simple forms of nighttime lighting, such as oil lamps made from clay, to extend activity after sunset. These small flames did not fully illuminate a room, but created pockets of warm light that allowed people to read, weave, or talk during early night hours. This subtle extension of evening activity may have influenced how sleep was divided or delayed. You imagine sitting inside one of these homes. The lamp flickers softly, casting moving shadows across painted walls. The air feels still, but not silent. There is always a sense of life continuing, even after sunset. Sleep in this environment seems less fragmented than in prehistoric times, yet still flexible. People likely went to bed not at a fixed hour, but when tasks were completed, when the body felt ready, or when darkness became too deep to continue work. The night is structured, but not rigid. Curiously, some ancient medical writings from later Greek and Roman interpretations of Egyptian practices describe sleep as a balance between bodily heat and environmental coolness. While these texts were written outside Egypt itself, they reflect how surrounding cultures viewed Egyptian life as deeply connected to natural rhythms. Sleep was seen as part of a larger system of harmony between body and environment. You step outside again and feel the coolness of the night air against your skin. The river nearby moves slowly, almost imperceptibly, yet it carries everything forward. This constant motion becomes a quiet metaphor for time itself. Inside homes, people sleep on simple bedding. There are no thick mattresses, no insulation beyond woven reeds or linen cloth. Yet there is a sense of familiarity in these arrangements. The body adapts to its environment rather than resisting it. Some researchers propose that in agricultural societies like ancient Egypt, sleep may have been influenced by seasonal labour cycles, especially during planting and harvest periods. During intense agricultural work, sleep might have been shorter or more segmented, while during flood seasons, rest patterns could become more relaxed and extended. Others argue that evidence for consistent sleep patterns is too limited to draw firm conclusions, and that individual variation was likely significant. You notice how the settlement quiets as the night deepens. There is no abrupt silence, only a gradual reduction in movement. The world seems to exhale slowly. In the distance, you can hear faint sounds of animals near the riverbanks. Frogs, insects, and the occasional splash of water blend into a natural background rhythm. These sounds do not interrupt sleep here. Instead, they become part of it, a steady auditory landscape that the mind learns to ignore or incorporate. One interesting detail from comparative studies of ancient dwellings is that mud brick architecture, common in this region, provided natural insulation that helped stabilize indoor temperatures. This likely made sleep more comfortable during hot nights, reducing the need for constant wakefulness due to temperature shifts. Small environmental advantages like this quietly shape human rest over generations. You imagine lying inside such a home. The walls are warm from the day but slowly cooling. The mat beneath you is simple, slightly rough, but familiar. Your body settles into it without expectation of softness or luxury. Sleep here feels more continuous than in earlier worlds, but still not entirely uninterrupted in the modern sense. People may wake briefly during the night, shift position, listen to sounds, or adjust coverings. Yet these awakenings do not carry stress. They are part of a natural cycle of awareness. Academic discussions remain divided on how structured sleep was in ancient Egypt. Some scholars suggest that increased social organisation and stable housing may have encouraged longer, more consolidated sleep compared to earlier societies. Others point out that environmental factors like heat, insects, and seasonal work demands would still have caused frequent nighttime awakenings. The truth likely lies in a blend of both perspectives, shaped by geography, class, and daily labour. You continue walking through this imagined night. The stars above feel steady, almost unchanging, as if they are watching over everything below without urgency. The river reflects them in broken patterns, constantly shifting yet always present. Inside one home, you notice a family resting together. Their breathing is slow and synchronized. There is comfort in proximity and shared warmth. Sleep here is not an isolated act, it is communal, even when silent. A quiet detail often mentioned in interpretations of ancient daily life is the symbolic importance of balance in Egyptian culture. This idea extended beyond religion and agriculture into health and bodily function. Sleep, as part of this worldview, was likely seen as a restorative return to balance after the active heat of the day. While this is not a direct medical record, it reflects how deeply interconnected life and rest were in cultural understanding. You feel that idea settle around you gently. Sleep as balance, sleep as return as the night continues. The settlement becomes almost entirely still. Only the river remains in motion, and even that feels slower now, softened by distance and darkness. You begin to understand that sleep in this era is not defined by interruption or continuity alone. It is defined by adaptability. The human body responds to environment, labour, temperature, and social structure in subtle ways that do not always align with modern expectations. And as you stand by the river one last time, you notice how the night here does not feel like something to survive or optimize. It feels like something to move with, gently in rhythm with water, wind, and breath. You leave the slow river banks of ancient Egypt behind, and the world shifts again, almost like a dream, changing its setting without warning. The air becomes cooler now, the light more grey and textured, as if you have stepped into a landscape shaped by philosophers, stone buildings, and restless thinking. You arrive in ancient Greece. It is night, but not empty night. The hills around you are quiet, dotted with small homes made of stone and clay. Olive trees move gently in the wind, their leaves producing a soft rustling sound that feels almost like whispering. The sea is not far, though you cannot see it yet, only sense its presence in the moisture of the air. Life in ancient Greece was deeply shaped by philosophy, civic duty, and seasonal agricultural labour. Most people worked during daylight hours, and the rhythm of sleep followed the sun quite closely. Yet sleep was not always seen as a single uninterrupted block of time. You walk into a modest household. Oil lamps glow faintly inside, their light small but steady. People here are not fully asleep yet. Some are still talking softly, others are finishing tasks that would be too difficult to do in daylight. In many Greek homes, the boundary between evening activity and sleep was fluid, not sharply defined. A widely accepted historical observation is that ancient Greek medical writers, including figures associated with the Hippocratic tradition, described sleep as an essential bodily process tied to balance of internal humours. Sleep was not only rest, but regulation, a way for the body to restore harmony after waking activity. You sit quietly near the edge of the room. The floor is cool beneath you. Woven mats provide some comfort, but there is still a directness to contact with the ground that modern life has mostly removed. The air smells faintly of oil, smoke, and dried herbs. Outside, the night is calm. Inside, someone adjusts their bedding. Another person speaks briefly, then falls silent again. Sleep here arrives gradually, not as a strict transition, but as a fading of activity. One lesser-known detail preserved in interpretations of Greek household life is the practice of keeping small personal objects near sleeping areas, such as pottery lamps, woven textiles, or even protective charms. These objects were believed to offer comfort or symbolic protection during the night. Reflecting a blend of practical and spiritual thinking around sleep, you imagine lying down in this environment. There is no sense of total separation from waking life. Instead, sleep feels like a gentle continuation, as if consciousness simply lowers its volume rather than turning off completely. Some historians suggest that in certain regions of ancient Greece, especially in rural areas, sleep may have naturally split into phases due to seasonal work patterns and limited lighting. Others argue that this interpretation may be influenced by later texts and should not be generalized across all Greek communities. The evidence is fragmented, and interpretations vary widely. You notice how the household quiets as time passes, conversations fade, the glow of the oil lamp becomes softer, its flame shrinking slightly as fuel is consumed. Shadows stretch across the walls, then slowly settle. Now you step outside again. The world beyond the home feels vast but not threatening. The stars above are bright and steady. In Greek thought, these stars were often associated with order and cosmic structure, reflecting a universe that was intelligible, even if not fully understood. You begin to sense how sleep might have been viewed not just as biological necessity, but as part of a larger natural order. Waking and sleeping mirrored broader cycles of nature, the rising and setting of the sun, the growth and dormancy of plants, the tides of the sea. A quirky detail emerges from interpretations of daily Greek life. Some accounts suggest that people sometimes used early forms of timekeeping, such as water clock, to structure portions of the day. While these devices were not commonly used in every household, their existence hints at an increasing awareness of time as something measurable, which slowly begins to influence how humans think about rest and activity. You picture this gently, a small vessel of water slowly dripping, marking time in a way that feels both precise and natural, and yet, even with such tools, sleep remains largely guided by the body rather than the clock. Scholars remain divided on how structured sleep was across different regions of ancient Greece. Some argue that urban centres like Athens may have developed more regular sleep routines due to social organisation and public life. Others suggest that rural communities likely maintained more flexible patterns tied closely to agriculture and daylight availability. There is no single answer, only overlapping possibilities. As the night deepens, you notice how the environment itself encourages rest. The temperature drops slightly, the air becomes stiller, even sound feels more distant, as if the world is slowly pulling away from itself. Inside the house, someone shifts position in sleep. A soft breath escapes. Then stillness returns. You realize that sleep here is not something isolated from waking life. It is woven into it. People move towards sleep as naturally as they move towards shade after sun. Another historical perspective from later philosophical traditions suggests that sleep was sometimes viewed as a temporary withdrawal of the soul from the active world. While this idea is more symbolic than scientific, it reflects how deeply sleep was integrated into broader thinking about human existence. You lie down now in this imagined Greek night. The ground is firm but familiar. Your body adjusts without resistance. There is no expectation of perfect silence or perfect darkness. Instead, there is acceptance of imperfection as part of rest. Outside, the wind moves lightly through olive trees. It creates a sound that rises and falls slowly, almost like breathing. And as you drift closer to sleep, you begin to notice something subtle across all these worlds you have passed through so far. Sleep has never been the same thing twice. It changes with environment, with culture, with light, with danger, with technology, with belief, and yet it always returns. You leave the soft hills of Greece behind, and the night begins to change shape again. It feels less rural now, less open, and more contained, as if the world is slowly tightening itself into stone walls and crowded spaces. You arrive in ancient Rome. The first thing you notice is not silence, but the absence of it. Even at night, Rome does not fully sleep. The air is filled with distant echoes, faint footsteps on stone roads, the occasional call from a night watchman, and the low hum of a city that seems to continue breathing long after sunset. Oil lamps flicker in windows, casting trembling light onto narrow streets below. A widely recognized historical fact is that ancient Rome was one of the largest urban centers of the ancient world. With a population that may have exceeded 1 million people at its height, this level of density created constant activity, and even nighttime was shaped by movement, trade, and social life that never fully paused. You walk through a narrow street between tall apartment buildings called insulae. They rise above you in uneven layers, wooden balconies jutting out slightly, some creaking softly in the night air. The smell of smoke, cooking oils, and damp stone lingers everywhere. It is not unpleasant, but it is persistent, like the city itself refuses to fade. Inside these buildings, sleep is shaped by proximity. Families live stacked above and beside one another, separated by thin walls that do little to block sound. You can hear faint conversations, a child turning in sleep, someone coughing in the distance. Even rest feels shared here, as if privacy is something the city only partially allows. In elite Roman households, sleep was often more structured and comfortable, with private rooms and quieter surroundings, but for the majority of citizens living in crowded urban conditions, sleep was frequently interrupted by noise, temperature changes, and the rhythms of city life. You step into one such modest home. Inside, the light of a small oil lamp flickers against plastered walls. The floor is cool stone covered in woven mats. A family lies scattered across the room, their sleep uneven but familiar. Someone shifts, then settles again. Another breathes deeply, then pauses briefly before continuing. One lesser-known detail from archaeological interpretation is that Roman cities often had organized nighttime patrols, sometimes referred to as vigileses. These night watchmen were responsible for watching fires, maintaining order, and moving through streets in shifts. Their presence meant that even in darkness, Rome had a structured rhythm of oversight, with footsteps occasionally passing through the night like reminders that the city was never entirely unattended. You imagine hearing those footsteps outside, slow, deliberate, fading as they move down another street. They blend with the distant sounds of water flowing through aqueduct channels and the occasional bark of a dog somewhere far away. Sleep in this environment becomes something flexible again, not in the gentle, natural way of earlier agricultural societies, but in response to noise, light, and urban density. People likely woke more frequently, adjusted their position, and returned to sleep in short cycles through the night. Some historians suggest that Roman urban life may have encouraged lighter, more fragmented sleep due to constant sensory stimulation. Others propose that people adapted over time, developing resilience to noise and maintaining relatively stable sleep despite the crowded environment. The evidence is indirect, drawn from texts, architecture, and later interpretations, so conclusions remain open. You walk further into the city, and the scale of it becomes more apparent. Streets twist and narrow unpredictably. Stone surfaces reflect faint light, making the ground feel slightly alive under shifting illumination. Occasionally, you pass public fountains or small shrines tucked into corners, places where people might pause even at night for brief moments of reflection or habit. Another interesting detail from Roman daily life is the widespread use of oil lamps made from clay or bronze, often designed with intricate shapes or symbols. These lamps were not only functional but also decorative, and in some households, their placement carried symbolic meaning, offering comfort during darkness and marking the boundary between wakefulness and rest. You imagine one of these lamps burning slowly in a quiet room. The flame bends slightly with air movement, casting elongated shadows that stretch across sleeping figures. The light is small, but it defines the entire space. Now you pause and notice something subtle. Despite the noise, despite the density, there is still sleep. Humans continue to rest here, adapting to conditions rather than waiting for perfect quiet. A broader historical observation often made about Roman society is that time was increasingly organised around public structures such as markets, political gatherings, and labour schedules. While not governed by modern clocks in the way we understand them, daily life in cities like Rome was becoming more regulated, which slowly influenced how people thought about rest and waking. You sit quietly in this imagined room and listen. The sounds of the city never fully disappear, but they shift in texture as the night deepens. Voices become rarer, movement slows, even distant noise feels softened, as if the city itself is exhaling after a long day. In some written sources from later Roman and medical traditions influenced by Greek thought, sleep was sometimes described as a process influenced by digestion, bodily heat, and mental activity. While these explanations are not scientific in the modern sense, they show how sleep was already being studied as a natural function of the body rather than purely a mystical state. You lie down now, feeling the stone beneath you. It is firm, unyielding, but strangely grounding. Your body adjusts to it in stages, shoulders relaxing first, then legs, then the slow release of tension in your breath. Outside, a cartwheel rolls briefly over stone somewhere far away. The sound fades quickly, absorbed by distance and darkness. Then there is stillness again, though not absolute. You begin to notice how sleep here feels layered. There is the immediate environment of your room, the building around it, and the city beyond it. Each layer carries its own level of sound and interruption, yet none of them fully prevent rest. Instead, they shape it into something more responsive, more adaptive. Some researchers continue to question whether segmented sleep patterns described in later historical texts were universal in Roman society, or whether they were more common in rural areas and later periods influenced by medieval interpretations. Urban Rome itself may have had a more irregular pattern that does not fit neatly into any single model. The uncertainty mirrors the city itself, complex and constantly shifting. As the night progresses, you feel yourself moving in and out of awareness more gently now, not because the world has become quiet, but because your mind has learned to filter it differently. The presence of noise becomes background rather than interruption, and in that realization, you understand something important about human sleep across time. It does not require silence. It requires adaptation. You leave the stone streets of Rome behind, and the city slowly dissolves into darkness. The soundscape fades first, then the lights, then the feeling of density itself. What remains is colder air, heavier skies, and the quiet pressure of a world that feels far less structured again. You arrive in medieval Europe. It is a long night, and it feels longer than modern nights, not because of time itself, but because of how deeply darkness settles over everything. There are no glowing city grids, no steady hum of infrastructure, only scattered homes, distant animals, and the soft breath of wind moving across fields that seem endless in the dark. A well-established historical observation is that medieval European life was closely tied to agricultural cycles, with most people living in rural communities and structuring their days around sunrise and sunset without artificial lighting. Activity naturally slowed after dusk, and sleep became one of the dominant rhythms of survival. You walk toward a small village. Wooden houses with thatched roofs sit close together for warmth and protection. Thin trails of smoke rise from chimneys, drifting upward into a sky filled with dense stars. The ground beneath your feet is uneven, a mix of dirt paths and scattered stones, slightly damp from earlier rain. Inside one of the homes, the air is warm but tight. You step carefully through a low doorway and feel the temperature shift immediately. The smell of burning wood, straw bedding, and simple food lingers in the air. Families often shared sleeping spaces, not only for comfort but for safety and efficiency in cold seasons. In many historical accounts describing medieval daily life, sleep is often referenced as occurring in two phases, commonly called first sleep and second sleep. People would fall asleep shortly after darkness, wake for a period in the middle of the night, then return to sleep until morning. During the waking interval, they might pray, talk quietly, or tend to small tasks. You sit near the edge of this imagined room. The fire has reduced to glowing embers. Shadows move slowly across wooden beams overhead. Someone shifts in sleep, pulling a wool blanket closer. Another breathes steadily, deeply, without interruption. One lesser-known detail from interpretations of household archaeology is that medieval bedding was often surprisingly layered despite limited materials. Straw mattresses, wool coverings, and animal hides were combined in ways that created insulation against cold floors, showing a practical understanding of comfort even in modest homes. You imagine lying down here. The surface is uneven but warm from shared body heat. The air feels close, almost enclosed, as if the room itself is holding the sleepers together through the night. Outside, the village is quiet, but not silent. You hear faint animal movement, possibly livestock shifting in nearby barns. Dogs occasionally bark in the distance, then stop abruptly. The night feels alive in small, indirect ways. Sleep in this environment seems naturally segmented, but not necessarily in a rigid or universal pattern. In some regions and periods, people may have followed biphasic sleep rhythms, while in others, longer continuous sleep may have been more common, depending on safety, climate, and household structure. Some historians propose that references to segmented sleep in medieval texts reflect a widespread cultural norm, especially in northern Europe during long winter nights. Others caution that surviving records are uneven and often come from specific communities, such as monastic writers, which may not represent everyday rural life accurately. The interpretation remains open. You adjust your focus to the rhythm of the household. The fire's glow pulses faintly, almost like breathing. The room feels suspended between wakefulness and rest, as if the entire structure is participating in sleep, not just the people inside it. Another detail drawn from ethnographic comparisons suggests that pre-modern rural communities often experience seasonal shifts in sleep length. During winter months, nights were longer and sleep could extend for more hours, while summer brought shorter nights and earlier waking. This natural variation shaped how people experienced rest across the year. You imagine winter here, snow outside, thick scents, and families sleeping closer together for warmth. Then you imagine summer, with earlier dawns and lighter sleep, doors left open to cooler air. Time in this world is not measured in numbers, but in darkness and light. As the night deepens further, the fire becomes almost entirely embers. The room glows faintly red in places, then fades into grey. Sleep grows heavier, more continuous now, though still punctuated by small shifts and unconscious adjustments of the body. You notice how vulnerability shapes everything here. Sleep requires trust in the environment, trust in the group, trust in the thin boundaries between safety and uncertainty. Even waking in the middle of the night is not necessarily alarming. It is simply part of being alive in a world that never fully stabilizes. Scholarly interpretations of medieval sleep often emphasize how environment and technology shaped rest more than any fixed biological rhythm. Yet there is ongoing disagreement about whether segmented sleep was truly normative or whether it has been overrepresented due to the types of texts that survived, particularly those written by religious or educated elites. The uncertainty feels appropriate here, as if even historical interpretation struggles to fully settle into one version of the night. You lie back in this imagined space. The wool beneath you is rough but warm. The air is thick with smoke that has softened over time. No longer sharp, just present. Breathing becomes slower, more synchronized with the room itself. Outside, the village continues its quiet existence, somewhere. A gate creaks softly in the wind, then stillness returns, and as you drift deeper, you begin to sense something subtle across these medieval nights. Sleep is not just rest. It is negotiation with cold, with darkness, with shared space, and with the limits of human control over environment. It is flexible, adaptive, and deeply human. You leave the medieval village behind, and the night shifts again, but this time the change is quieter, almost internal. It is less about geography and more about atmosphere. The darkness feels more enclosed, as if you are stepping inside something rather than moving across it. You arrive at a medieval monastery. The air is cold and still, carrying the faint scent of stone, wax, and old wood. Thick walls surround you, built not for comfort, but for endurance. Somewhere in the distance, a bell has already rung earlier in the night, and its memory still seems to linger in the silence. A widely accepted historical fact is that monastic communities in medieval Europe followed highly structured daily schedules, often guided by fixed prayer hours known as the canonical hours. These included specific nighttime prayers that required monks to wake at predetermined times, shaping a very distinctive pattern of segmented sleep and interruption. You walk through a long stone corridor. Your footsteps feel muted, absorbed by thick floors. Torches flicker along the walls, their light small but steady. The air is cool enough that you are constantly aware of your own breath, each exhale briefly visible before disappearing. Inside the sleeping quarters, rows of simple beds line the walls. There is no privacy here in the modern sense. Everything is shared, ordered, and aligned. The monks lie in quiet rest, fully clothed, ready to rise at any moment if called, in the middle of the night. A bell rings. It is not loud in a chaotic sense, but it is clear, purposeful, and impossible to ignore. Some monks begin to stir immediately, sitting up slowly, rubbing their eyes, adjusting their robes. Others remain still for a moment longer, as if transitioning between layers of sleep and awareness. One lesser-known detail preserved in monastic records is that some communities allowed a short period of private reflection or reading during nighttime wake periods, often by candlelight. These moments were not considered interruptions of rest but extensions of spiritual discipline, blending wakefulness and contemplation into a single continuous practice. You imagine sitting in that space. A small candle flickers beside you. The flame is steady but delicate, illuminating only a narrow circle of parchment and stone. The rest of the room fades into shadow, as if it is waiting patiently for attention that will never fully arrive. Sleep in this environment is not entirely personal. It is scheduled, communal, and shaped by a religious rhythm. Yet it still follows the same human patterns of light rest, deeper rest, and brief awakenings that we have seen across earlier worlds. Some historians suggest that monastic life preserved older segmented sleep patterns that may have been more common in pre-industrial Europe. Others argue that monastic schedules were highly specialized and should not be used as a general model for everyday sleep in broader society. The interpretation remains contested, shaped by limited surviving documentation and the unique nature of religious life. You move through the monastery slowly, observing how night is managed rather than simply experienced. There is intention in everything here. Even rest is structured into a spiritual purpose. Another detail from historical analysis of monastic architecture suggests that sleeping quarters were often designed with acoustics in mind, allowing bells and footsteps to carry clearly through the space. This ensured that no one would miss the signals that mark transitions between sleep and prayer, reinforcing the idea that wakefulness itself was part of devotion. You return to the dormitory. The monks begin to settle again after the brief wake period. Some lie back down immediately, while others remain quietly still for a few moments, breathing evenly, letting consciousness soften once more. The candlelight dims slightly as wax melts. Shadows stretch across stone walls, then retract as the flame steadies again. The room feels like it is slowly exhaling. You lie down as well, though you are only an observer here. The stone beneath you is cold, but not harsh. It carries a sense of permanence, as if it has witnessed countless nights of the same rhythm repeating endlessly. Outside these walls, the world is still medieval, still shaped by agriculture, weather, and darkness. But inside, sleep has become something measured, almost ritualized. And yet even here, in the most structured environment you have encountered so far, sleep is not uninterrupted. It bends, it pauses, it resumes, it follows both body and belief. Scholarly perspectives differ on whether monastic sleep patterns reflect broader medieval norms or represent a unique institutional system shaped by the religious discipline. Some researchers see monasteries as preserving older rhythms of segmented rest, while others emphasize their strict organization as an exception rather than a rule. The uncertainty itself feels fitting, as if even history struggles to decide how structured human sleep truly was. As the night continues, the bell remains silent for now. The monastery rests again. Breathing becomes the dominant sound, slow and unified, like a single organism drifting through darkness. You begin to notice something subtle and consistent across every world you have visited so far. Sleep is never truly stable. It always adapts to the shape of life around it. You leave the stone monastery behind, and the sound of bells fades slowly into the distance. The darkness opens up again. Less structured now, less enclosed. It feels like stepping out of a disciplined breath into something wider and more instinctive. You arrive in the world of the Vikings. The air is cold, sharp and clean. It carries the smell of wood smoke, sea salt and wet earth. Above you, the sky stretches vast and heavy with stars. The night here is long, especially in northern regions where winter darkness can feel almost endless, shaping every aspect of daily life. A well-established historical fact is that Viking-age societies in Scandinavia were organized around farming, seafaring, and seasonal survival. Daily routines were strongly influenced by daylight availability, with winter nights significantly extending the hours of darkness, naturally affecting patterns of rest and activity. You walk toward a large wooden structure known as a longhouse. It rises low and wide against the landscape, built from timber, turf, and stone. The roof curves slightly under its own weight, covered in earth that helps insulate against the cold. Smoke seeps gently from an opening at the top, drifting into the night air. Inside, the warmth is immediate. The longhouse is filled with the scent of burning peat, animal hides, and cooked food. People live, work, and sleep in the same shared space. There are no separate rooms in the modern sense. Instead, space is divided by function and familiarity, with sleeping areas arranged along the edges of the hall. Families lie close together on raised platforms or thick layers of furs and straw. Livestock may also be sheltered within the same structure during harsh winters, adding both warmth and a constant sense of presence. One lesser-known detail from archaeological interpretations of Viking settlements is that sleeping arrangements often prioritize warmth efficiency over privacy, with people and animals sharing insulated indoor space to survive extreme cold. This created a sleep environment that was socially dense but thermally protective. You imagine lying here, The heat from bodies and fire blends together into a steady background warmth. The air feels heavy but safe. You hear the subtle movement of people shifting in sleep, the occasional exhale, the faint rustle of fur coverings. Sleep in this environment is shaped by both danger and comfort. Outside, the cold is severe. Inside, survival depends on cooperation and closeness. That closeness becomes part of the sleep experience itself. Some historians suggest that in northern climates during the Viking Age, sleep may have been naturally segmented due to long winter nights, with periods of wakefulness used for maintenance tasks, storytelling, or tending fires. Others argue that the evidence is indirect and that sleep patterns likely varied widely between households and regions, making generalization difficult. You sit near the edge of the longhouse and observe the rhythm of the night. Firelight flickers across wooden beams overhead. Shadows move slowly along the walls, shaped by breath and flame. The entire space feels alive, even in rest. Another interesting detail from archaeological and literary sources is the importance of storytelling in Viking culture. Sagas and oral histories were often shared in communal spaces, sometimes during evening hours when work was finished, but sleep had not yet fully taken hold. These stories may have extended the transition between wakefulness and sleep, blending memory, myth, and rest. You imagine voices rising softly in the dim light, recounting journeys across seas, battles, and distant lands. Even as listeners drift towards sleep, fragments of narrative remain in the mind, carried into dreams. Sleep here is not isolated. It is communal in a deeply physical sense. Bodies share warmth, sounds are shared, even breathing becomes part of a collective rhythm. The longhouse settles gradually as the night deepens. Conversations fade, movement slows, fire reduces to glowing embers that pulse gently like a heartbeat. You notice how the structure itself seems designed for endurance rather than comfort in the modern sense. Thick walls, shared heat, and compact space all contribute to survival in a harsh climate. Sleep adapts to this reality, becoming less about silence and more about resilience. Scholarly interpretations of Viking Age sleep patterns remain cautious. Some researchers propose that environmental extremes likely encourage segmented rest, especially during winter months when darkness was prolonged. Others emphasize that written sources are limited and often shaped by later medieval narratives, making it difficult to reconstruct precise sleep behavior. The uncertainty lingers, like mist over cold water. You lie back into the imagined space. The fur beneath you is thick, slightly uneven, but warm. The air carries a steady rhythm of breath and distant crackling fire. Your awareness drifts in and out gently, without urgency. Outside the longhouse, the world is frozen and vast. Inside, life continues in soft, shared stillness. And as you drift closer to sleep within this northern night, you begin to sense something consistent across every world you have seen so far. Sleep always reflects survival first, comfort second, and structure only when life allows it. You leave the longhouse warmth behind, and the northern cold slowly thins into something different. The air feels drier now, more elevated, as if you are moving into a world where knowledge itself begins to take shape on parchment and ink. You arrive in the Islamic Golden Age. The night here feels calm but intellectually alive, as though thought itself never fully sleeps. You find yourself in a city of domes, courtyards, and softly glowing lamps. The scent of paper, ink, and burning oil drifts through open windows. Stars above are sharp and precise, almost mathematical in their clarity. One well-documented historical reality is that during the Islamic Golden Age, roughly between the 8th and the 14th centuries, major centers of learning such as Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba developed advanced medical, philosophical, and astronomical traditions. Scholars in these cities often wrote extensively about the human body, including sleep, dreams, and cycles of rest. And you walk through a courtyard lined with arches, water trickles gently from a fountain, creating a steady, soothing rhythm. Inside nearby rooms, lamps burn late into the night. This is a world where study often extends beyond sunset, and where night hour will be used not only for rest, but also for reflection and scholarship. In some preserved medical texts from this era, physicians describe sleep as a necessary restorative process influenced by bodily balance, diet, and environmental conditions. Sleep was not viewed as passive, but as an active phase of healing and internal regulation. You sit near a low stone wall and feel the coolness of the surface beneath your hand. The air carries a faint warmth from nearby lamps, mixed with the freshness of night air moving through open corridors. One lesser-known detail from historical manuscripts is that some physicians in this period made early observations about differences in sleep quality depending on temperature, emotional state, and daily exertion. While their explanations were framed in the medical theories of their time, they show an unusually careful attention to sleep as a measurable human experience. You imagine a scholar sitting nearby, writing by lamplight. The flame flickers gently, casting moving patterns across pages filled with notes on anatomy, astronomy, or philosophy. Even as the night deepens, there is a sense that knowledge continues to expand quietly. Sleep in this environment is flexible for many people, especially scholars and workers. Nights may include periods of wakefulness for study, prayer, or conversation. Rest is integrated into a broader rhythm of intellectual and spiritual life rather than strictly separated from activity. Some historical interpretations suggest that segmented sleep patterns may have persisted in parts of the medieval Islamic world, particularly in households where nighttime reflection or religious practice was common. Other researchers caution that available texts primarily reflect scholarly or urban perspectives, and may not fully represent rural or everyday sleep behaviour. You move through narrow streets where lanterns hang at intervals, their light softened by glass and metal. The city feels structured, but not rigid. There is movement even in stillness, thought even in rest. Another interesting detail preserved in historical literature is the attention given to dreams. Dream interpretation was often discussed in medical and philosophical contexts, sometimes linked to emotional states or bodily conditions. Dreams were not treated as random, but as meaningful reflections of internal balance or spiritual experience. You imagine falling asleep in such a world. Your mind carries both the weight of study and the calm of structured daily life. Sleep arrives not as escape, but as continuation of reflection in another form. Scholarly perspectives remain varied on how widespread segmented sleep was across different regions and social classes during this period. Some researchers propose that flexible sleep patterns were common due to cultural practices and environmental factors. Others argue that surviving texts disproportionately represent educated elites, making it difficult to generalize conclusions about the broader population. The uncertainty feels appropriate in this quiet night, as if even history prefers gentle ambiguity here. You pause beside the fountain again. Water continues to fall in a steady rhythm, indifferent to time. The sound blends with distant footsteps and the faint rustle of pages turning somewhere nearby. Sleep in this world is neither entirely fragmented nor fully consolidated. It is adaptive, shaped by knowledge, climate, and devotion. It bends around human purpose rather than standing apart from it. As the night continues, lamps slowly dim, ink dries on parchment, voices lower into silence, and you begin to sense a pattern forming across all the worlds you have visited so far. Human sleep is never just biology. It is shaped by what each era believes the night is for. You leave the quiet courtyards of the Islamic Golden Age behind, and the night begins to feel heavier again, less illuminated by learning and more shaped by uncertainty. The air cools, and the world slowly shifts into a time where medicine is still deeply entangled with philosophy, religion, and inherited tradition. You arrive in medieval Europe once more, but this time through the lens of medicine and bodily theory. The atmosphere feels dim, lit only by scattered candlelight and small hearth fires, inside homes and early medical spaces. Sleep is not just something experienced, but something explained, categorized, and interpreted through the logic of the body. A widely recognized historical reality is that medieval European medicine was heavily influenced by the theory of the four humours, inherited from ancient Greek and Roman traditions. Health, including sleep, was believed to depend on the balance between blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. You find yourself in a small chamber where a physician might have worked. The walls are simple, the tools minimal, and yet there is a strong sense of attention given to bodily states. Herbs hang from wooden beams, containers of oils and tinctures sit on rough shelves. Sleep is not seen as random here, but as something that reveals the internal condition of the body. You imagine a patient lying nearby. The physician observes not just symptoms of illness, but also sleep patterns, wakefulness, and dreams. Sleep is part of diagnosis, part of interpretation. In some surviving medical writings of the period, sleep is described as a necessary cooling of internal heat generated during waking life. The body was thought to accumulate heat and activity during the day, and sleep allowed that energy to be redistributed and restored. One lesser-known detail from translated medical manuscripts is that some physicians recommended specific sleeping positions or environmental adjustments, such as head elevation or changes in bedding materials, to improve the quality of rest according to humoral balance. These recommendations were not standardized, but they show an early attempt to treat sleep as something that could be influenced deliberately. You sit quietly in this imagined space and notice how fragile sleep feels in this world. It is closely tied to health, and therefore closely observed. Waking in the night is not just a physical event, but something that might carry meaning about the body's internal state. Some historical interpretations suggest that medieval medical writers often associated fragmented sleep with imbalances in bodily heat or digestion. Other researchers caution that these texts reflect theoretical frameworks rather than lived experience, making it difficult to determine how ordinary people actually interpreted their sleep interruptions. The uncertainty lingers gently, like candlelight flickering against stone. You step outside again into a village street. The night is still deep. A dog moves briefly through shadows and disappears. Somewhere, a door creaks open and then closes again. Life continues in small, quiet fragments. Sleep in this environment is shaped by more than medicine. It is shaped by cold weather, shared living spaces, seasonal labour, and the limits of illumination. Yet medical theory adds another layer of meaning, turning natural awakenings into something that can be explained, and sometimes corrected. Another interesting detail for historical records is that some medieval physicians believed dreams could reflect the movement of humours within the body. While this idea is not supported by modern science, it shows how closely sleep and inner life were connected in medical thought. You imagine lying down in a simple bed. The mattress is filled with straw or wool, uneven but familiar. The air is cool and faint smoke from a nearby hearth drifts through the room. Sleep arrives slowly, not as a clean break, but as a gradual descent. Scholarly perspectives remain divided on how much medical theory influenced everyday sleep practices among ordinary people. Some historians argue that humoral explanations were largely confined to educated circles. Others suggest that these ideas filtered into broader cultural understanding through clergy and local healers, shaping how people interpreted their nighttime experiences. The truth is not fully accessible, only partially reconstructed. As the night continues, you notice how sleep in this period is still flexible, still shaped by environment, but now increasingly framed by explanation. Even natural awakenings might be seen as meaningful, rather than simply biological. And as you drift through this medieval, medical night, you begin to sense something subtle emerging across history. Humans are not only trying to sleep, they're also trying to understand why they sleep the way they do. You leave the candle-lit medical chamber behind, and the night begins to feel less theoretical again. The explanations, the humours, the careful interpretations of the body slowly fade into something more immediate, more physical. The air grows colder, and the world becomes closer, tighter, more domestic. You arrive in early modern Europe. The environment feels crowded in a different way than ancient Rome, not dense with city noise, but dense with people sharing limited space. Houses are small, often built of wood and stone, with thick walls that hold in warmth but also hold in sound, smell, and breath. A widely accepted historical reality is that between the 16th and 18th centuries in Europe, population growth and urban expansion led many households to adapt shared living arrangements. Entire families, and sometimes multiple generations, often slept in the same room due to limited housing and heating resources. You step inside one such home. The fire is low now, reduced to glowing embers that cast a faint orange light across the room. The air is warm but close, carrying the scent of wood smoke, fabric, and the faint traces of daily life that never fully disappear. Beds are simple and often shared. Straw mattresses, wool blankets, and wooden frames provide basic comfort, but privacy is minimal. Sleep here is not an isolated experience, it is communal, shaped by proximity and necessity. You lie down among others in this imagined space. Breathing is audible on all sides, slow and uneven. Someone shifts slightly in sleep, causing the wooden frame to creak softly. Another person exhales deeply, then becomes still again. In many historical descriptions of early modern domestic life, sleep is often portrayed as segmented by natural interruptions such as temperature changes, household noise, and the practical needs of tending fire or livestock during the night. These interruptions were not always seen as disturbances, but as expected parts of nighttime life. One lesser-known detail from household records and diaries of the period is that people sometimes kept simple items near their beds for nighttime use, such as candles, drinking vessels, or small personal objects for comfort. These objects reflect a practical approach to nighttime wakefulness, suggesting that being partially awake during the night was not unusual. You imagine waking briefly in the middle of the night here. The room is dark but familiar. You can hear the house itself settling, wood contracting in the cold, distant wind pressing against walls. There is no sense of alarm, only awareness. Sleep in this era remains flexible, but increasingly influenced by changing social structures. Work patterns are beginning to shift, especially in towns where craft production and early forms of industry are emerging. Yet in many rural areas, sleep still follows seasonal rhythms tied closely to daylight and agricultural cycles. Some historians suggest that early modern sleep may still have included segmented patterns similar to earlier periods, especially in rural communities with limited artificial lighting. Other researchers argue that evidence is inconsistent and that sleep behaviour likely varied widely depending on region, class, and occupation. The uncertainty remains. Like a half-remembered dream that refuses to settle into one form, you step outside again. The night air is colder now, stars are still visible, but the feeling of night is changing, is becoming something that feels less natural and more managed, as if human life is slowly beginning to push against it. Inside homes, however, sleep continues in its older rhythm. People wake, shift, resettle, and drift again into rest. The night is not continuous silence. It is a sequence of small human adjustments. Another interesting detail from personal letters and diaries of the period is that some individuals described waking during the night to reflect, pray, or simply think quietly before returning to sleep. These moments were sometimes seen as peaceful rather than disruptive, offering a sense of solitude within shared living conditions. You imagine this stillness, a candle lit briefly, then extinguished, a page turned, a breath released into darkness. Scholarly interpretations of early modern sleep continue to vary. Some emphasize continuity with medieval segmented sleep traditions, while others highlight gradual changes influenced by urbanization. Changing work schedules and evolving cultural expectations about productivity and rest, the debate reflects a large uncertainty about how deeply industrial and pre-industrial sleep patterns differ, especially in transitional periods where old and new ways of living overlapped. As the night deepens, the house grows quieter again. The embers fade further, the air cools slightly, and bodies settle into deeper rest. You begin to notice a slow shift across the centuries you have passed through so far. Sleep is still human, still fragile, still adaptive, but it is starting to be questioned more deliberately, not just experienced, but evaluated, and that subtle change will soon reshape everything. You leave the dim, shared rooms of early modern Europe behind, and the night begins to change character again. This time it feels less like a continuation of older rhythms and more like a slow mechanical intrusion, as if something outside the body is beginning to influence sleep itself. You arrive at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. The air feels different immediately. It is thicker, tinged with smoke and coal dust. Even at night, the sky above industrial towns is no longer purely dark. It carries a faint glow from furnaces, factories, and early street lighting. Night is no longer fully natural, it is becoming engineered. A widely recognized historical fact is that the Industrial Revolution, beginning in the late 18th century in Britain and spreading across Europe and North America, fundamentally transformed patterns of labor, timekeeping, and daily life. Factory systems required standardized schedules, which gradually pushed human activity toward more fixed hours, including sleep. You walk through a growing industrial town, brick buildings rise where wooden homes once stood. Chimneys release slow, constant streams of smoke. The soundscape is no longer quiet, even at night. You hear distant mechanical rhythms, metal on metal, and the echo of production that does not fully pause. Inside modest workers' housing, sleep begins to change shape. Families still rest together in small rooms, but the day has become more rigid. Long working hours in factories leave people exhausted, yet their sleep is increasingly constrained by schedules rather than purely by natural light. One lesser-known detail from early industrial urban records is that some factory towns experienced what contemporary observers described as continuous noise fatigue, where workers reported difficulty achieving deep rest due to the constant presence of machinery sounds, even outside working hours. This marks an early documented shift in environmental sleep disruption. You imagine lying in such a room. The bed is simple, often shared, and the walls are thin enough that distant sounds never fully disappear. Sleep arrives quickly due to exhaustion, but it is not always deep. It is shaped by lingering awareness of sound and routine. In some early medical and social commentaries from this period, sleep is increasingly discussed in terms of efficiency and recovery. Rather than balance or natural rhythm, rest becomes something that must support productivity, especially in urban working populations. Here, interpretations become more divided. Some historians propose that pre-industrial segmented sleep patterns began to decline rapidly as artificial lighting and strict work schedules became more common. Others suggest the transition was gradual, with older sleep rhythms persisting in rural areas long after industrial centres changed. The uncertainty reflects a broader transformation that is still unfolding in this moment of history. You step outside again into the industrial night. Gas lamps begin to appear along streets, casting steady pools of light. These lights extend human activity further into darkness, subtly shifting when sleep begins. Night is no longer a boundary, it is becoming a controllable environment. Another interesting detail from early industrial diaries is that some individuals expressed confusion or frustration about their changing sleep, noting that they felt tired but unable to sleep continuously. These personal accounts hint at an early tension between biological rhythms and imposed schedules. You imagine this feeling, the body wanting rest, but the structure of life interfering with how that rest unfolds. Scholarly interpretations remain divided on whether industrialization directly caused the collapse of segmented sleep, or whether it accelerated an already ongoing cultural shift toward consolidated rest. The evidence is mixed, drawn from medical writing, personal diaries, and emerging scientific interest in sleep as a measurable phenomenon. The disagreement itself reveals something important. Sleep is no longer just observed, it is being analysed, compared, and questioned. As the night continues, factories slow but do not fully stop. The glow of furnaces persists in the distance, even in reduced activity. The presence of industry feels constant, like a background pulse that never entirely fades. You return to a small room, the bed is narrow, the air slightly warm from nearby structures. Sleep comes, but it feels different from earlier eras, more compressed, more pressured, less intertwined with natural darkness. And as you drift through this industrial night, you begin to sense a turning point forming across history. For the first time, human sleep is being shaped not only by nature, culture, or survival, but by systems that operate independently of the night itself. You leave behind the heavy rhythm of early industrial towns, and the night begins to shift again, not into silence, but into something more organized. The darkness is still present, but it is no longer absolute. It feels interrupted, segmented by new forms of human control. You arrive in a city illuminated by gaslight. At first, it is subtle, a faint glow along streets that once would have disappeared completely into darkness. Then, as you walk further, the pattern becomes clear. Rows of lamps stand at regular intervals, their flames enclosed in glass, each one carefully maintained to burn through the night. The city is no longer fully dependent on the sun or the moon. It has begun to produce its own night. A well-documented historical reality is that gaslighting became widely adopted in major cities across Europe and North America during the 19th century, transforming urban environments by extending visibility into nighttime hours. Streets, shops, and public spaces could now remain active long after sunset, reshaping daily routines in ways that directly influence sleep. You walk along a paved street lined with tall buildings. The light from gas lamps pools softly on the ground, creating overlapping circles of illumination. Between these pools, shadows still exist, but they are thinner now, less complete. Night feels divided into zones of light and dimness, rather than one continuous field of darkness. Inside nearby homes, sleep begins to shift in response. Windows no longer disappear completely into blackness. Curtains glow faintly from reflected streetlight. People living near busy roads or central districts experience a night that is never fully dark, never fully quiet, even indoors. The presence of light changes how deeply the body can settle. You enter one such home. The interior is modest, shaped by the constraints of urban life. Furniture is simple, functional, and arranged closely due to limited space. A gas lamp outside casts a faint, wavering glow through the window, painting slow-moving patterns across the walls. Someone lies in bed nearby. Their sleep feels lighter, more fragmented. not necessarily because of noise, but because of illumination that never fully disappears. The body remains partially aware of time, even without a clock. One lesser-known detail from urban diaries and household observations of the 19th century is that some people reported adjusting their sleeping arrangements by using heavier curtains or layered fabric coverings to block out persistent streetlight glow. These small adaptations reveal how quickly domestic life responded to changing urban illumination. You imagine trying to sleep in this environment. The bed is comfortable enough, far more so than earlier eras, yet the night feels less complete. There is always a suggestion of activity just beyond the walls. A carriage passing in the distance, footsteps on stone, the soft hiss of gas flames outside. Sleep still comes, but its boundaries feel different. In some medical writings of the 19th century, sleep begins to be studied more systematically. Physicians and early scientists attempt to measure duration, quality, and cycles of rest. Sleep is increasingly treated as something that can be optimized, rather than simply experienced. This marks a subtle but important shift in how humans relate to their own nighttime rest. Interpretations from historians vary on how quickly gaslighting influenced sleep patterns. Some argue that urban illumination significantly delayed sleep onset and contributed to shorter or more irregular rest in cities. Others suggest that the impact may have been uneven, affecting wealthier districts more strongly, while poorer areas remained relatively dark. The evidence is complex and geographically inconsistent. The disagreement highlights how uneven technological change can be across a single city. You continue walking through the illuminated streets. Gas lamps flicker slightly in the night air, their flames steady but not entirely still. The light they produce is warmer than electric lighting will later become, almost softer, more organic, yet it still extends human presence into hours that once belonged entirely to darkness. Another interesting detail from period accounts is that gas lamps required regular maintenance by workers who would move through the city at night, lighting, trimming, and relighting flames. These workers created their own quiet rhythm within the night, a hidden layer of labour that kept the city visible while most people slept. You imagine these figures moving slowly through streets, carrying tools and ladders, briefly interrupting the stillness to restore light. Their presence suggests that even in nighttime modernisation, sleep and labour remain intertwined. Inside homes, sleep continues to adapt. Some people begin to delay bedtime slightly, influenced by extended social activity. Reading, or the simple presence of light. Others maintain earlier sleep habits but experience more frequent awakenings due to environmental stimulation in rural areas outside the city. However, the night remains much darker. There, sleep patterns may still follow older rhythms tied closely to sunset and sunrise. This contrast creates a growing divide between urban and rural experiences of night. Some researchers suggest that gaslighting marks the beginning of a broader separation between natural circadian rhythms and socially constructed time. Others caution that such interpretations may exaggerate the immediate impact of lighting technology, emphasizing gradual transition rather than sudden change. Either way, the night is no longer uniform. You stand again in the street and look upward. The sky is still visible above the glow of lamps, but it feels slightly pushed back, as if human light is gently reclaiming space from darkness. Stars remain, but they are less dominant now, competing with artificial illumination. A quieter observation from cultural records of the period notes that nighttime social life began to expand in illuminated urban centres. People could walk, meet, and remain active later into the evening, gradually shifting the boundary between day activity and sleep. You imagine this expansion, conversations continuing later, shops staying open longer, the night becoming less of an ending and more of a continuation. Sleep in response becomes more negotiated, not only with the body, but with the environment and social expectation. As you return to the interior of the home, the gaslight outside continues its steady burn, The room feels dimmer by comparison, but not fully dark. The faint glow still reaches inside, gently marking time even without sound. You lie down again and notice how different this feels compared to earlier centuries. There is comfort, stability, and softness, but also an undercurrent of awareness that the night is no longer entirely separate from waking life. And as sleep approaches, you begin to sense another subtle transformation taking shape across history. Night is no longer simply something humans enter. It is something they begin to redesign. You leave the soft glow of gaslit streets behind, and the night changes again, this time with a sharper edge, as if something in human attention itself has become more restless. The world feels brighter even before you see the source of that brightness. You arrive in the Victorian era. Cities are larger now, more organised, more self-aware. Streets are carefully planned, buildings more uniform, and public life feels increasingly structured. Yet at night, something subtle has shifted. The darkness is no longer complete, and neither is rest. A well-established historical reality is that the Victorian period saw rapid urban expansion, industrial growth, and significant changes in daily routines, especially in cities like London and Manchester. These changes included longer working hours, increased use of artificial lighting, and growing public interest in discipline, health, and productivity. You walk through a residential street lined with brick houses. Curtains are drawn in most windows, but faint light still escapes from some interiors. The air is cooler here, but it carries the residue of the day, smoke from chimneys, damp stone, and the faint smell of coal. Inside one of the homes, sleep feels quieter but more structured than in earlier eras. Beds are more comfortable now, with better mattresses, blankets, and furniture designed specifically for rest. Yet the mind of the era is increasingly focused on efficiency, even in sleep. In medical and social writings of the time, sleep begins to be framed as something that should be regular, sufficient, and uninterrupted for optimal health. Physicians and reformers increasingly emphasize the importance of consistent sleep schedules, especially for workers and children. One lesser-known detail from household diaries and personal letters is that some individuals expressed anxiety about waking during the night, interpreting it not as a natural occurrence but as a sign of poor health or improper rest. This reflects a growing cultural shift in how nighttime awakenings were perceived. You imagine lying in such a room, the bed is soft, the blankets warm, the environment far more comfortable than earlier in centuries. And yet, there is a subtle tension, a sense that sleep is expected to behave in a particular way. In some earlier sleep studies from the late Victorian and Edwardian periods, researchers began documenting sleep duration and patterns using emerging scientific methods. Sleep becomes measurable, something that can be recorded, analysed, and compared. This marks a turning point where sleep begins to enter the realm of scientific scrutiny. Interpretations among historians differ on how quickly Victorian cultural expectations reshaped actual sleep behaviour. Some argue that industrial schedules and moral attitudes toward productivity significantly reduced segmented or flexible sleep patterns. Others suggest that older rhythms persisted in private life, even as public discourse shifted toward consolidated rest. The evidence remains incomplete and uneven. The uncertainty mirrors the transitional nature of the era itself. You step outside again into the street. Gaslighting is still present in many places, but electric light is beginning to appear in experimental forms. The night is becoming brighter, more controllable, and less dependent on natural cycles. Another interesting detail from Victorian domestic culture is the widespread use of bedtime routines, especially for children. These routines included structured times for washing, prayer, reading, and sleep, reflecting a growing belief that discipline and rest contributed to moral and physical well-being. You imagine this quiet order, a household winding down in carefully arranged steps, the night not just arriving, but being prepared for. Sleep in this period becomes increasingly associated with respectability and self-control. Waking in the night, once a neutral or even ordinary experience, begins to acquire subtle negative associations in some contexts, especially within urban middle-class culture. Some researchers propose that this period marks the beginning of modern expectations around uninterrupted sleep as the ideal. Others argue that such expectations were unevenly distributed and did not fully replace older sleep patterns across all social classes. The debate remains open, shaped by limited personal accounts and emerging medical literature. You return inside and notice how quiet the house has become. Even the small sounds of earlier eras, creaking wood, distant animals, shifting shared space, are reduced here. The environment is more controlled, more insulated. Sleep arrives with greater ease in some ways, yet it carries a faint pressure of expectation. It is no longer just rest, it is something that can be optimized, improved, and evaluated. Another subtle detail from period writing is the growing association between good sleep and modern progress. Rest becomes part of a broader narrative about health, productivity, and self-improvement, reflecting the values of a rapidly changing society. You lie still and feel how different this is from earlier centuries. There is comfort, safety, and stability, but also a quiet narrowing of what sleep is allowed to be. And as you drift toward rest, you begin to notice a deeper transformation taking shape across the centuries you have traveled through. Sleep is no longer only shaped by the night itself, it is increasingly shaped by expectation. You leave the structured quiet of the Victorian home behind, and the night begins to feel more analytical, as if it is being observed rather than simply lived in. The darkness is still present, but it is thinner now, interrupted by the growing presence of measurement, research, and curiosity directed inward. You arrive at the early beginnings of modern sleep science. The environment shifts into something less like a place and more like a laboratory of thought. Gaslight and early electric illumination coexist. Papers, notebooks, and scientific instruments begin to define how the night is understood. Sleep is no longer only a personal experience, it is becoming data. A widely acknowledged historical development is that in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, physiology and psychology began to study sleep in a systematic way, using observation, experiments, and early recording techniques to understand cycles of rest, dreaming, and wakefulness. You walk through a modest research space. It is quiet, but not peaceful in the older sense. There is a sense of focus here, of attention directed towards something that had previously been taken for granted. A subject lies in a controlled environment, observed during different stages of sleep. Notes are taken, timings are recorded, patterns are sought. Inside this emerging scientific world, sleep begins to be broken down into components, duration, depth, frequency of awakening, and dream activity all become subjects of interest. What was once simply night is now something being divided into measurable parts. One lesser known detail from early sleep research records is that some of the first systematic observations of sleep involved researchers or physicians monitoring subjects throughout the night by staying awake themselves, often recording changes in breathing, movement, and responsiveness manually before the advent of advanced instruments. You imagine this quiet vigil, a dim room, a notebook, the slow passage of hours marked only by careful attention. Sleep becomes something watched from the outside rather than only experienced from within. In early medical and psychological writings, sleep is increasingly described in terms of cycles and phases. Concepts such as light sleep, deep sleep, and dreaming begin to take shape. Even before modern neuroscience fully defines them, sleep is becoming structured in language before it is fully understood in mechanism. Interpretations among historians of science differ on how revolutionary these early studies truly were. Some view them as the foundation of modern sleep medicine, marking a clear break from earlier humoral or philosophical explanations. Others suggest continuity, arguing that older ideas about balance and restoration quietly persisted beneath the surface of new scientific terminology. The uncertainty reflects the gradual nature of intellectual change, where old and new frameworks overlap rather than fully replace one another. You step outside this early laboratory and notice how the world itself is changing alongside it. Cities are brighter, schedules more rigid, and daily life increasingly synchronized with mechanical time. Clocks are no longer rare objects. They are becoming central to how life is organized. Another interesting detail from early observational studies is that researchers sometimes noted variability in sleep duration between individuals even under controlled conditions, leading to early questions about whether sleep requirements were truly universal or biologically flexible. You imagine how surprising this must have been at the time. The idea that sleep might not be identical for everyone quietly challenges assumptions about human uniformity. Scholarly discussions from the period remain cautious in their conclusions. Some early theorists attempted to define ideal sleep durations and optimal conditions, while others warned that such standards might oversimplify a complex biological process that varies with age, health, and environment. The debate itself signals a shift. Sleep is no longer just a background function of life. It is becoming a scientific problem to be solved. You return to the observation room. The subject still sleeps, unaware of the measurements surrounding them. Breathing rises and falls in steady rhythm. Small movements occasionally ripple through the body, recorded carefully by the observer. Sleep here feels paradoxical. It is deeply personal, yet increasingly externalized, something intimate, yet also studied. Another lesser-known detail from early sleep literature is the growing fascination with dreams as potential windows into the mind. Some researchers attempted to categorize dream content, linking it to emotional states or daily experiences, even though their methods were highly speculative by modern standards. You imagine dreams being written down, translated into notes, turned into early attempts at psychological mapping. As the night continues, you notice how sleep is being redefined in real time. It is no longer only a natural rhythm, or a cultural practice, or a medical theory. It is becoming an object of investigation, something that can be dissected and analysed. And that shift changes everything that comes after it. Because once sleep becomes measurable, it also becomes something people begin to worry about. You leave the quiet laboratory of early sleep observation behind, and the night feels different immediately. It is no longer just being studied from the outside, it is now being entered, measured, and mapped with increasing precision, as if human life itself is learning to look inward with sharper tools. You arrive in the modern scientific era of sleep research. The environment feels clinical but calm. There are recording devices, controlled lighting, and structured environments designed specifically to isolate sleep from disturbance. The night is no longer dark in the same way it once was. It is carefully regulated, adjusted, and observed under controlled conditions. A widely recognized historical development is the discovery and mapping of circadian rhythms in the 20th century, showing that humans possess internal biological clocks that regulate sleep and wake cycles independent of external light. This understanding fundamentally changed how sleep was interpreted, linking it to internal physiology rather than only external habit or culture. You walk through a sleep research facility. The lighting is dim but adjustable. Walls are designed to reduce noise. Beds are simple but standardized. Everything is arranged to remove unpredictability from the sleeping environment, so that patterns can be observed clearly. Inside one of the rooms, a person sleeps while connected to monitoring equipment. Small sensors track brain activity, eye movement, and muscle tone, Sleep is no longer just seen, it is translated into waves, cycles, and graphs. One lesser-known detail from early sleep laboratory studies is that researchers were often surprised to discover how structured sleep actually is, revealing repeating cycles of different brain activity stages that occur throughout the night rather than a single uniform state of rest. You imagine looking at those early recordings for the first time. The idea that sleep is not a simple block of unconsciousness, but a layered process unfolding in predictable patterns would have reshaped long-standing assumptions about rest. In modern sleep science, sleep is commonly divided into stages, including light sleep, deep sleep, and rapid eye movement periods associated with dreaming. Each stage plays a different role in physical restoration, memory processing, and emotional regulation. Interpretations among historians of science vary on how disruptive these discoveries were to older cultural understandings of sleep. Some argue that modern sleep science completed a long transition away from philosophical and medical speculation toward biological precision. Others suggest that earlier traditions already recognize patterns within sleep, even if they lacked the tools to measure them directly. The disagreement highlights a continuity beneath apparent scientific revolution. You step out of the laboratory environment and into a modern city night. The contrast is striking. Artificial lighting is now everywhere. Screens glow in windows. The night is no longer a single shared darkness, but a fragmented environment of private illumination. Another interesting detail from modern sleep studies is the recognition that sleep quality is influenced by a wide range of factors, including stress, temperature, light exposure, and lifestyle habits. This has led to the development of sleep hygiene concepts aimed at improving rest through environmental and behavioral adjustments. You imagine how different this is from earlier eras, where sleep was shaped primarily by survival, environment, or social structure. Now it is shaped by information about itself. Scholarly perspectives remain varied on whether modern understanding of sleep has improved human rest overall, or whether increased awareness has introduced new forms of anxiety about sleep quality. Some researchers emphasize progress in treating sleep disorders and understanding health connections. Others point to rising concerns about insomnia and disrupted sleep in modern populations. The tension reflects a deeper question about knowledge itself. You return to the sleep laboratory in your mind. The sleeper remains still, but their sleep is no longer invisible. It is displayed in patterns and graphs, translated into measurable signals that can be compared across time and individuals. Another lesser-known detail from contemporary sleep research is the growing recognition of micro-awakenings during the night, brief transitions between sleep stages that most people do not consciously remember, but that form part of normal sleep architecture. You begin to see how closely this aligns with earlier historical patterns. What was once interpreted as segmented sleep in pre-industrial societies now appears, in a different language, as natural cycling within modern sleep science. As the night deepens, the laboratory remains quiet, machines continue to record, data continues to accumulate. Sleep is no longer mysterious in the same way it once was, yet it still resists full simplification. And as you stand in this modern understanding of the night, you begin to notice a subtle continuity across all eras. Humans have always woken in the night. What changes is not the waking itself, but how it is interpreted. You leave the controlled quiet of the sleep laboratory behind, and the night expands again, but in a different way than before. It is no longer only a physical environment or a historical setting. It feels personal now, as if the night itself is being filtered through modern life in countless overlapping ways. You arrive in the present day. The world is bright even at night. Cities glow with artificial light that stretches far into the distance. Screens illuminate rooms in soft blues and whites. Even when people are physically in darkness, their attention often is not. The night has become porous, interrupted by constant signals of activity. A widely accepted modern scientific understanding is that human sleep is regulated by a combination of circadian rhythm, homeostatic sleep pressure, and environmental cues such as light exposure and temperature. These systems interact in complex ways, shaping when we fall asleep and how we maintain rest throughout the night. You find yourself in a quiet modern bedroom. The bed is comfortable, far more than in any earlier era you have visited. The room is insulated from noise, temperature controlled, and designed specifically for rest. And yet, even here, sleep is not always smooth or uninterrupted. Outside this room, the world continues to exist in fragments of light and sound, notifications, distant traffic, and the subtle glow of devices create a night that is never fully separate from waking life. One lesser-known detail from modern sleep research is that brief awakenings during the night are considered normal for most humans, even if they are not remembered. The brain naturally cycles through lighter and deeper stages of sleep, and transitions between them can include momentary awareness. You imagine this now from inside the experience itself, a soft shift in consciousness. A brief awareness of the room, then sleep returns, often without memory of the interruption. In contemporary discussions of sleep, there is growing interest in how modern lifestyles affect sleep quality. Factors such as artificial lighting, irregular schedules, stress, and screen exposure are all studied for their influence on sleep patterns. Interpretations among researchers differ on how much modern sleep deviates from historical patterns. Some suggest that industrial and post-industrial societies have compressed and standardized sleep into a single consolidated block that differs from earlier segmented patterns. Others argue that the underlying structure of sleep cycles has remained consistent, even if cultural framing has changed. The debate reflects a large uncertainty about how much of sleep is biological continuity and how much is cultural adaptation. You lie in this modern room and notice how quiet it is, yet how mentally active it can feel. The absence of external disturbance does not always guarantee internal stillness. Thoughts continue, memory processes continue, and emotional processing quietly unfolds beneath awareness. Another interesting detail from recent sleep studies is the increasing recognition of individual variability in sleep needs. Some people function well with shorter sleep durations, while others require longer rest. Challenging older assumptions about a single optimal sleep length, you begin to see sleep less as a fixed requirement and more as a flexible biological system that responds to both internal and external conditions. Scholarly perspectives remain diverse on whether modern sleep science has fully explained the phenomenon of nighttime awakenings, or simply reframed them in more detailed language. Some researchers emphasize that we now understand sleep architecture far better than in any previous era. Others note that subjective experience of sleep still contains mysteries that resist full explanation. The uncertainty feels familiar, echoing earlier year historical ambiguity, just expressed in different terminology. You step outside again into the modern night. The city glows in layers. Some buildings are bright with constant activity. Others are dark but filled with electronic signals. The boundary between day and night feels less absolute than in any previous era you have visited. Another lesser-known observation from contemporary behavioral studies is that many people experience a natural dip in alertness during the night that can lead to brief awakenings, even in otherwise healthy sleep patterns. These moments often pass unnoticed unless attention is directed toward them. You imagine how differently this would have been interpreted in earlier centuries. What was once seen as spiritual reflection, bodily imbalance, or normal biphasic rhythm is now understood as part of neurophysiological cycling. As the night continues, you notice a quiet continuity forming across all the eras you have passed through. The environment changes, the explanations change, the expectations change, but the experience of brief waking remains remarkably constant. And that realization begins to reshape the question entirely. Perhaps the mystery is not why humans wake at night, Perhaps it is why we ever expected them not to. You remain in the present night, but something shifts in how you are seeing it now. It no longer feels like a single era. Instead, it feels like a layered overlay of every era you have passed through, all quietly present beneath modern life like echoes that never fully disappeared. The bedroom is still quiet. The city outside still glows. Yet your awareness now moves differently, as if it is listening to older rhythms beneath the modern surface. A widely established finding in neuroscience is that sleep is composed of repeating cycles of approximately 90 minutes, alternating between non-REM and REM stages, with brief transitions between them that can include partial awakenings. These transitions are a normal part of brain activity rather than a failure of sleep. You lie there and think about how many times this has been happening without you noticing. The small shifts in position. The brief moments where awareness surfaces and then fades again. The night is not truly continuous. It is stitched together from many quiet returns. Outside this room, modern life continues its influence even in sleep. Artificial lighting delays melatonin release. Irregular schedules shift internal clocks. Emotional stress from daily life often carries into the night, shaping how easily the mind settles. One lesser known detail from sleep laboratory observations is that people awakened during light sleep stages often report a vague sense of having already been awake briefly earlier in the night, even when they have no clear memory of it. This suggests that micro-awakenings may be more psychologically present than consciously recorded. You imagine these moments as thin layers of awareness, barely thick enough to register, yet still part of lived experience. Not interruptions, but transitions. In contemporary sleep medicine, conditions like insomnia, fragmented sleep, and circadian rhythm disorders are studied not as mysteries of character or behavior, but as interactions between biology, environment, and psychology. Treatment often focuses on aligning habits, light exposure, and sleep timing with internal rhythms. Interpretations among researchers differ on how much modern sleep disruption represents a true departure from historical norms. Some propose that contemporary society has experienced more pronounced fragmentation due to technology and lifestyle. Others argue that humans across history have always experienced variable sleep, and modern awareness simply makes it more visible. The uncertainty itself feels like a continuation of everything you have seen so far. You shift slightly in bed, the sheets are soft, temperature regulated, familiar in a way earlier eras could not imagine. And yet the body beneath them still behaves according to older patterns. It cycles, it pauses, it briefly wakes. Another interesting detail from behavioral sleep studies is that many people naturally experience a midpoint awakening during the night, often around the transition between sleep cycles, even when no external disturbance is present. This pattern appears across cultures and environments, suggesting a deeply biological rhythm. You begin to see this not as an anomaly, but as a structure, a rhythm that has been present in every historical environment you have visited, only interpreted differently each time. Medieval households called it first sleep and second sleep. Monasteries framed it as scheduled devotion. Industrial societies treated it as disruption. Modern science describes it as stage transition. The event itself has remained, but the meaning has changed repeatedly. Scholarly perspectives remain divided on whether the modern ideal of uninterrupted sleep is biologically optimal or culturally constructed. Some researchers argue that consolidated sleep improves restoration and aligns with contemporary health outcomes. Others suggest that human sleep may retain an inherent flexibility that does not always conform to a single continuous model. The debate is not about whether waking happens, it is about what waking means. You look back, not with your eyes, but with understanding shaped by all the eras you have moved through. Firelit nights, riverbank homes, monasteries, industrial streets, gaslit cities, laboratories. Each one contained the same quiet phenomenon, observe through different beliefs. Another lesser-known insight from comparative sleep research is that subjective sleep quality often depends more on perception of rest than on strict continuity, meaning that people who wake briefly during the night may still experience fully restorative sleep if those awakenings are not perceived as distressing. You realize how much of sleep is interpretation layered over biology. The room remains still, the city remains distant, and yet the night feels less like absence now, and more like a sequence of gentle returns to awareness that have always been part of human experience. As you settle deeper into this understanding, something soft begins to emerge across all the centuries you have travelled through. Sleep was never broken, it was always rhythmic. You are still here, in the present night. But now it no longer feels like a single moment in time, it feels like a culmination of all the nights you have walked through. Firelight, river silence, stone monasteries, crowded cities, gaslit streets, industrial noise, laboratory monitors, and modern glowing screens all seem to overlap gently in your mind, like layers of sleep stacked on top of each other. The bedroom around you is quiet, the world outside is distant. Even your thoughts feel slower now, less urgent, as if they are beginning to match the rhythm you've been tracing all along. A widely recognized conclusion in modern sleep science is that brief awakenings during the night are a normal part of human sleep architecture, occurring as the brain transitions between cycles of lighter and deeper sleep stages. These awakenings are usually so short that they are not remembered, yet they are present in nearly every healthy sleep pattern studied. You lie there and feel that truth not as information, but as experience, the subtle shift in awareness, the momentary return of thought, the quiet drift back into sleep without effort. It has always been there, across every era you have visited, only described differently each time. Outside, the modern world continues its soft presence, not loud now, not intrusive, just existing. A faint glow through curtains, a distant hum of life that never fully stops, even at night. But it no longer feels like a disruption. It feels like background. One lesser-known detail from longitudinal sleep studies is that many people report their most vivid sense of nighttime awareness not as a single awakening, but as a feeling of drifting near the surface of sleep multiple times, creating the impression of a layered or wave-like night when reflected upon in the morning. You begin to understand how natural this really is, not a flaw in sleep, but its structure, a cycle that rises and falls, rather than a straight line that must never be broken. And now, something soft happens in the way you think about history itself. All those worlds you walked through begin to align not as separate explanations, but as different interpretations of the same quiet pattern. In ancient homes, it was simply life. In medieval villages, it became first sleep and second sleep. In monasteries, it became discipline. In industrial cities, it became interruption. In modern laboratories, it became data, and here, in the present, it becomes understanding. Interpretations among sleep researchers continue to vary on how best to describe the relationship between natural sleep cycling and cultural expectations of uninterrupted rest. Some emphasize biological continuity across human history. Others highlight how strongly modern norms shape what people believe sleep should feel like. The disagreement itself feels less important now than the continuity underneath it. You shift slightly. The sheets warm around you, your breathing slows. There is no pressure to stay awake, and no pressure to remain continuously asleep. Only the gentle movement between states that has always been there. Another small but meaningful observation from recent sleep research is that reducing anxiety about nighttime awakenings often improves overall sleep quality more effectively than attempting to eliminate awakenings entirely, suggesting that acceptance plays a quiet role in how rest is experienced. You let that idea settle, not as instruction, but as something closer to permission. The night around you does not demand perfection. It never has. It only moves. And as you drift closer to sleep now, You begin to see what this entire journey has been pointing toward all along. Across every age, every culture, every technology, and every belief, humans have always woken in the night, not because sleep is failing, but because sleep is alive, and as the final quiet deepens, that realization softens into something like warmth, something like understanding, something like rest itself. The night does not end, it simply carries you through. You are here now, in the quietest part of the night, where everything begins to slow down even further, as if the world is gently lowering its voice just for you, the story you have followed. Through ancient fires, stone rooms, crowded cities, and glowing modern lights, starts to feel distant now, like something drifting gently behind your thoughts rather than in front of them. Your breathing becomes softer without you trying. The room around you is still the same, but it feels less defined now, as if its edges are slowly dissolving into shadow. The weight of the blanket, the faint temperature of the air, even the distant hum of life outside, all of it blends into a single quiet presence that asks nothing from you. Across time, humans have always reached this moment in different ways, some under stars, some beside rivers, some in candlelight, some under electric glow. Yet the feeling is strangely similar. A pause, a release, a gentle surrender to rest that does not need to be explained or understood anymore. There is nothing left to solve here, nothing left to analyze or follow, only the soft rhythm of being still. If your mind wanders, it can simply drift, like water moving slowly without direction, carrying no urgency, no expectation. You might notice how even your thoughts begin to space themselves further apart. One thought appears, then slowly fades before the next one arrives. And in that widening silence between thoughts, there is a kind of comfort that is difficult to describe but easy to feel. The night does not ask you to stay aware. It does not ask you to remember anything. It only allows you to rest in your own time, in your own way, as deeply as your body is ready to go. So now you can let go a little more, not all at once, but gently, in layers, like the final light fading from a distant sky, or the last echo of sound settling into stillness. And as everything becomes softer, quieter, further away, there is nothing left to do but rest. Sweet dreams.